Hello everybody, welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary. Tonight we're going to be doing a vertical of Old Grandad. Now I have all three of the expressions here, and I'm going to be doing the Old Grandad versus the Bonded versus the 114. Now these all share a mash bill, so that should make things very fair. There's a little bit of a difference in their ABV, 80, 100, and 114, and we're going to put all three of them up against each other and see which one I like the most. Typically in these verticals, I end up kind of doing eliminations round by round, but seeing as how there's only three of them together, I'm going to just do all three at a time. So this actually should be a bit of a shorter video. Now, a really fun thing I want to get out there before I get into this. Ian Fleming, the guy who created James Bond, believe it or not, James Bond used to prefer to drink Old Grandad to martinis, which is bizarre, right? So let's go into talking about these bottles. Old Grandad as a brand has been around forever. Basically, they started with Basil Hayden Sr., who was kind of his own thing. He made his own whiskeys, and he ended up earning the moniker of the father of high rye bourbon. Now, he didn't start the Old Grandad distillery. In fact, his grandson, Raymond Hayden, ended up doing that and then naming it after his grandfather. So that's where Old Grandad comes from. But this distillery ended up making Old Grandad like this at 86 proof for many years. And in 2013, they proofed it down to 80, likely just to kind of get a little extra bottles out of the barrel, but maybe somebody thought it tasted better that way. Either way, honestly, I'm not going to complain about the taste of this. I think it's just as good at 40%. So this ends up having a mash bill that all three of them share of 27% rye, which is very high for a bourbon, then 63% corn and 10% malted barley. As I mentioned, this is 40%, it's no age statement, and this bottle right here is basically in the high teens as far as price. You could find this from like $16 to $19, so super affordable. Next we have the Old Grandad Bonded. Now bonded means something here, it means bottled in bond, and for those of you that don't know, bottled in bond is a legal requirement. It's something that the US government upholds, and the idea is that you need to create your whiskey within one distilling season. Now one thing I did learn is that distilling season actually has a time frame. It's from January to June or August to December, so you can actually do it twice in 1 year, which is cool. That distilling season needs to happen within the same year, and then you need to have the whiskey be made by a single distiller at a single distillery, all within 1 year. Additionally, it needs to be 100 proof exactly. You need to mark on the bottle where it was exactly made, which distillery it was made in, and as I mentioned, the government kind of oversees it to make sure that you're not messing around with the whiskey. It's a little bit of a vestigial concept at this point because it's just, like, we have the Food and Drug Administration, we have alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, like, we have people looking after our whiskey and our alcohol. But the concept is still cool, and it ties us back into history, and I don't really mind it. I think it's nice to have on there. It reminds me of things like Prohibition and how far we've come since that dark time. Oh, and it has to be 4 years old. Lastly, we have the Old Grandad 114. Basically, this is just a higher proof version of the regular Old Grandad. This is 40%, this is 57%. One thing that I couldn't find is the significance of the 114. So if you happen to have any idea out there, I would love to hear it in the comments. I tried to put a couple of pieces together, basically like, you know, this was released in 1970, 114 years prior, would have been around 1885, but I mean 1855. If it was 1885, that would make more sense. And aside from that, I couldn't find anything else. This is about $30, which puts it about twice the price of the regular Old Grandad, and you know, maybe $5 to $10 more than the Bonded. So not a whole lot difference here, just a higher proof. Now it's time to do a head-to-head. So I'm going to put all three of these against each other. The idea being that I already know what these are. If I smell them, it's gonna kind of be obvious. This is 114, this is like 80, and then this one's 100. I think I'd be able to tell just off smell alone. So I'm not gonna do these blind, but I am gonna just kind of put them together and see which one I like the most. Now, as I mentioned, this one is pretty close to empty, so I think at the end of this episode, I'm gonna toss this bottle back and kill it. So make sure to kind of hang out just for that, or click on the chapter below. I'll make a thing, because it sounds fun. All right, let's go ahead and give a nose and taste of the regular Old Grandad. One thing that you're really getting here is how sweet it is despite the rye, at least on the nose. Now I do remember the taste being a little different, but you can smell the rye. However, this smells like a very nice, sweet bourbon and something I'm going to enjoy. So let's go ahead and have a sip. Cheers. And then the rye hits you, and it's not bad in any way, but there is always that little thing in my brain that when something doesn't taste the way it smells, it's not off-putting, but it is like startling, I guess. So in this case, the rye is overbearing. There is some hints of orange, vanilla, oak, after the rye, but then it's just more rye. So I like this. I mean, I like a high rye with bourbon, and I really like ryes. So I'm cool with this, but it does kind of tame down the different types of notes that you might get off the flavor when all you're tasting is rye. All right, let's have a quick sip of water and then move on to the bonded. Nose actually, oddly enough, a little tamer on this. It doesn't have that sweetness that we had with the regular Old Grandad. It's very muted and very, almost smells like I'm smelling water. It's a little strange. Maybe I was wrong when I said that I would have been able to tell. I probably would have pegged this one as a lower ABV off the nose alone. Yeah, even just continuing to smell this, all I'm getting is a bit more alcohol vapor, almost to the point where it's burning the nose a bit. But the actual scents that you're getting here, there's a little bit of orange peel in there, maybe a little bit of like tobacco smoke or leather, and maybe a little bit of vanilla, but all of these are so mild, it's like struggling to even point those out. All right, let's have a sip. Cheers. Now the flavor comes off quite a bit better. This is way more robust. It does have that little bit of a sharpness from the alcohol, but it's very well balanced, so it doesn't taste like ethanol. It tastes like, or it doesn't taste like I'm just inhaling alcohol. It is mostly, very little sweetness, not as overbearing on the rye as the OGD. OGD. But yeah, kind of, I would say this is actually a little boring. I like the flavor of how well it carries the alcohol. I could see this one being a better addition to a cocktail than the regular Old Grandad because it does carry more alcohol with it. But as far as just drinking this neat, the flavors are about as muted as the nose. I think the only things I would pick out here, and I hesitate to say cinnamon because I really feel it's just the alcohol kind of being a little burny, but it tastes like cinnamon, vanilla, and then maybe a little bit of peanut butter or some other type of nuts is what I would say. All right, let's have some water and then we'll do the 114. Interesting thing, I remember doing my review of this originally and it was way higher on the ABV as far as nosing it. Even my notes, I remember writing like, this is basically just all alcohol. Now, given there isn't a ton of this left, and that's probably a big part of it, and it kind of goes to show that when a bottle is really, really empty, it does change the way it noses and potentially tastes, depending on how long. But what I'm getting here, because the alcohol is hiding, there are a couple of other notes that I can pick out, namely brown sugar, and then cinnamon, vanilla, and oak. So very bourbon-esque kind of flavors, but specifically in that order. The sweetness does come across, not as sweet as the original Old Grandad, but the alcohol is much more tame here. Be aware that if you bought this bottle yourself, it's probably going to be a lot stronger initially. Let's have a taste. Cheers. Well, there it is. Found the alcohol. That is most of what you're tasting here. The sweetness does carry the alcohol well. It is still very sweet. The rye is very clear. You know, there are times when rye mixed with higher alcohol really is an abrasive flavor. This is not. This does kind of sit right here in my throat a bit as being just like heavy alcohol. But other than that, the flavor was kind of one tone, mostly rye, but not offensive. And it carried the 114 very well. So I'm okay with it. Let's have another sip. Cheers. Yeah, this is one that I think you could get into a lot of trouble very quickly with, especially if you're making cocktails out of it. So be aware if you're making like an old-fashioned out of this, it's gonna hit you hard, maybe within one or two. But as far as the actual tasting notes go, I don't know, mostly just sweetness and rye. So far, I gotta say, and I'm gonna go through these again really like rapid fire, the regular Old Grandad is kind of doing it for me. Which I'm a little surprised, not entirely because I do remember liking it, but I'm a little surprised that it's holding up this well against the bonded. I know a lot of people love that one. All right, so I'm gonna have some water. I'm gonna taste all three of these and I'm gonna come right back. Okay, so I've drank all three of these a couple more times and I've come to a conclusion that all three of these bring something different to the table and I have been able to pick a winner, at least in my mind. So with the regular 80, this one, what this brings to the table is somewhat smooth drinking, although actually after drinking the Bonded and the 114, this was not as smooth as I remembered it being. So I'm gonna say actually the 114 carries the smoothness the best of all three. The regular Old Grandad, the sweetness is what is the star here. So I would say the flavor of the 80, the Old Grandad is best. As far as the Bonded goes, I think this one tastes the most like rye. I know that I said it was very muted, but it kind of grew on me a bit, and mostly in the finish. So the initial taste is not where this one shines, it's mostly in the finish. That one's a little bit of a stretch. Frankly, the Bonded was my least favorite of all three. The Old Grandad 114 versus the regular Bonded, I actually think I'm gonna change my decision, and by that I mean I'm gonna drink them both again, and I'm gonna potentially change, so give me a sec. This is a tougher decision than you would think. The Old Grandad 114 is something that I wouldn't consider as a daily sipper, but I also think would make a killer cocktail. I think that I would rather drink this one neat than the regular Old Grandad, but when I consider the versatility of any whiskey that costs as little as these do, I would be way more willing to try a number of cocktails or potentially blending or doing whatever with something that was $15 to $30. And so when I think about the uses of these and what I think about just their flavor, sorry if I'm rambling a little bit, I'm just kind of hemming and hawing a little bit. I'm gonna pick the 114 because I think it's a more interesting sip. And I think that it wouldn't be a daily sipper, and that's the only reason I'm really struggling here. Is I would pick this one as a daily sipper. I would not pick this one, but if I had to pick one or the other, it would probably be the 114. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go 114, and as I mentioned, I'm gonna kick this bottle back because that sounds like a lot of fun. I don't know, that's probably about a drink and a half, maybe. All right, let's do it. While I'm doing this, I want you to check out below. I have whiskeydickpicks.com, which is my single barrel options. At the moment of filming, I have one more bottle of my barrel bourbon, and then I have an Australian whiskey called Starward, and then I have another one called Stellum, which is a rye, so kind of appropriate for tonight. But cheers to all of you, and this one goes out to all of my patrons that you can see here. Cheers, everybody. Yeehaw.